Okay, and then we actually use that same I2B2 to feed another cloud-based analytic platform called TriNetX. And TriNetX is quite different than the CTSI network. It's a very well-funded partnership with the pharma industry to aggregate data, also limited data from across the country, and try to enhance recruitment for clinical trials, informatics analytics, and also clinical trials management. And so we're in the early stages of starting to work with TriNetX, but I wanted to show you guys a little bit about what it looks like, what we could do today on campus with this, and where we might be headed in the future, depending on how and what we learn over the next couple of months. So again, TriNetX is global. It's US and international. The primary source of support is pharma. So the contributors of data don't pay to participate, but the company is obviously making money from aggregating data. The goals are to connect the drug discovery world with the research world. And so pharma companies connect to study sites like BMC. Investigators can connect with patients from the site side. And there's the ability to share real world data to make clinical and observational research easier and more efficient. And the idea here is that pharmaceutical companies are blinded, but invitations to participate in research can come to us, and we get about 1 every 2 weeks for a new trial that a pharma company would be interested in partnering with someone. Do we have any interest in this, and would we like to follow up? So the ball is generally in our court to decide if this is a good fit for us, if we have someone interested in that topic, and then we opt back in. So that's the primary use case right now, is we get invitations from TriNetX to collaborate around research. And certainly in the COVID world, there's a tremendous amount of work going on at TriNetX trying to organize new trials and new work. However, the data platform itself also offers a lot of really nice functionality that we hope to use more if it works well for our research community. So I just wanted to show you some of that stuff and encourage folks who are interested to start working with us to test out some of these tools. So there's really 2 pathways to use TriNetX. One is a query tool, much like the I2B2 query tool that I just showed you, but much slicker and easier to use. And then there is, and we're live with that, and beginning to plan with BMC research leadership how to roll that out to the BMC research and BUMC research communities over the next couple months. And then there's this exploratory research network participation level where many more tools are available, and direct access to limited data and the underlying data are available to do more sophisticated research. And I'm going to just give you a taste of that, and if folks are interested, you can follow up with us afterwards, and we'll see if we're looking for a few more people to help us pilot that system, especially as it relates to COVID research. So it's a pretty simple login. You'll recognize that a lot of the fact types are the same as in I2B2. It's just organized a little differently. Diagnoses, procedures, medications, labs. We don't have genomics. Visits, for us, it's mostly just hospital visits, ER visits, and outpatient visits, and then demographics. And they make it really easy for you to identify things that a patient must have and things a patient cannot have to be in the cohort that you're interested in. In this particular example, I'm just doing a super quick demonstration of how you could pull up another group of patients with diabetes, but this time you want patients who have diabetes and also have a hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of blood pressure, of glucose control for patients with diabetes. And you also want to make sure that you only have patients who have ever had an A1C greater than 6, which is considered elevated. And so what TriNetX does is it gives you some really nice ways to explore the data itself. So for that cohort of people with diabetes who ever had an A1C, this is actually the distribution of their values, of all values in the system for this group. And you can limit it to only those greater than 6. You can put less than this. There's some really nice ways to zero in on the range of data that you're interested in while you're seeing the range that's actually in the system. So it's pretty nice that way. And then you can go back to your main query and say, okay, this query is to give me all the people with diabetes who have ever had an A1C greater than 6. Count your patients, and we get 41,000 patients at Boston Medical Center. At the time, there were 1.1 million BMC patients in TriNetX. So you can start to really hone in on subpopulations. You can look at certain features of that group, like what's the distribution of their ages, how much data do they have in the actual system. So this is the count of people of that 41,000 that actually have data beyond 5 years, or 5 years old in the system. Certainly many more, that group plus more will have less than or greater than 0, any data at all in the system, and then gradually over time. But I think this shows that there's a large number of people who have data beyond 5 years, which is pretty interesting and good, easy, helpful to know in terms of the richness and longitudinality of the data that you might be looking for. Another cool feature is you're able to use that cohort to see how many people touched the health system over time. So you could potentially use this for subject recruitment, where you could say, well, it was kind of all over the place, but it wasn't that much variation. And if we kind of regress that, you would expect roughly this number of patients to come in over this period of time moving forward. So you can kind of, I think you could probably use this in a grant proposal to say, we think that there's going to be this many people coming in, so that if we got even a third of them, we'd be in pretty good shape, stuff like that. And there's other tools too, where you can see how the various levels of your query filter the cohort, how it starts at the full count, and then gradually the numbers dwindle based on the components that you use, and you can move them up and down. And the purpose of this is really just to show people that this tool is quite a bit easier to use than ITV2, and I think from our perspective is going to be a tool that we're going to try to promote more this coming year. And so you'll be hearing more about that, and we'll be working with BMC research leadership to try to organize that approach and offer it to folks. Now, this other tool is even cooler, but it's really just in the preliminary phases, and I don't think we know enough to say whether this is going to be available for the community or not. But the way they're thinking about it is the way that many others across the country are thinking about cloud-based analytics for limited data. And the idea here is that you can reuse this real-world data that they have to create evidence, and through a really easy-to-use user interface, make things much more accessible to researchers. And this has been kind of a holy grail, and I wouldn't say we're there yet necessarily, but it is a pretty significant step forward from the kind of aggregate queries that we've been doing. And again, right now we have an agreement with TriNetX to use this for cohort. So if you are a cohort health services researcher and interested in exploring this, we'd love to hear from you afterwards. And then we'll decide whether we want to move forward with this type of thing. It's a bigger relationship, and it's going to involve people, more beyond me to sort this one out. But the idea is that they're trying to take the next step forward beyond those simple queries and counts to allow people to explore first cohorts in sort of a descriptive way, trying to say, I have one group and I have another group, and how are they similar and how are they different in terms of outcomes and comorbidities. Outcomes over time, so the identify risk of outcomes in cohorts using a retrospective approach, and then really trying to understand baseline characteristics. But the most interesting thing to me is the ability to start to look at doing kind of a GUI based comparative effectiveness research process that involves propensity scoring, truly trying to match patients for all exposures and predictors other than the primary exposure of interest, so that you can get a statistically reliable exposed and unexposed group, and then look at the outcomes in those groups. And this is where and in a quantitative way understand what's going on in the data. And to me, this is where we've been trying to get to with clinical research informatics for a long time. And if we're successful, it'll be great. And if we're only a little bit successful, it will be a really strong start, because I think this is the direction that if we are to be successful with the secondary use of these big clinical data systems, we're going to have tools that get much more sophisticated than what we've been using before. I will say that these same tools are being built in the Odyssey world, which we're getting more and more familiar with, and are much more open source. And so, you know, we're going to be balancing whether these really well-developed, supported proprietary tools are better for our community than the open source ones, or whether we can do both, or we just have a lot to learn on that. But if any of you are interested in using this TriNetX research platform for COVID-related research, we have about 2 months to play in the TriNetX sandbox and evaluate this tool, and just let me know, reach out to me, and I'll get back to you, and we could explore that a little more. So we are kind of